Draws a parallel between Moses and Jesus. Moses, the ancient lawmaker, is figuratively related to Mount Sinai. Jesus, the new lawmaker, is figuratively related to Mount of Galilee. That's fine. I think ultimately everything that we know about history is about
so that saying of Jesus in John 6:27,
Yep.
I take that to mean that this is what the church believed, that Jesus was the seal.
So what you just read is not saying that Christians simply made up words for Jesus,
It's
but
not that they're made up, but they believe that Jesus was living inside them.
well, so
And then they
that's not
communicated that.
that's not how I read it. How I read it says that what happened is that the words that are within the text are not the verbatim words of Jesus, but approximately they capture the idea that he was espousing. Because if it was the case,
The church was so firmly convinced
that the
that the risen Lord, who is Jesus of history, lived in her
and taught through her
that she expressed
her
her teaching in
teachings.
the form of Jesus'
Jesus is saying. So, for example,
So who was
Matthew,
here?
Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
What are they? They are the church. So they are all complicit in the writings of the sayings of Christ because they walked with him. For example, what you're trying to insinuate, which is interesting, is that throughout the histories, the church has just come up with things, unanimously agreed on them, and then included them as the words of Christ. But we don't have any instance of that ever happening anywhere in history.
So, for example,
Yep.
like with regards to John,
Yep.
the fourth gospel isn't just simply history.
It's more than that.
But it basically, arranges the narratives and
Yep.
adapts them in order for theological purposes.
I mean, of course, every
Or
every
teaching.
every gospel does that, and every writing of the ancient world also does that. You'd be hard pressed to find a simply fact-based or simply numbers-based writing of the Old Testament. Sorry, of the ancient world. Sorry, everything was done under the interpretation or consideration that the world was both factual and also spiritual. So even in something like the Gaelic Wars, by attributed to Caesar, there's even like theological elements mentioned in that as well. Even though he's only recounting his time fighting in Gaul. So ultimately, John, for example, even if I looked at the Quran with that same lens, the Quran isn't purely factual. There's much like theology put inside of it, and even if you believe Shabir Ali, mythology. So I don't see that as being a disqualifier in any way for what's written in the Bible or what's written within, for example, even the Quran. Because with the Quran, I wouldn't make the claim that, because it's interesting, isn't it? Would you make the claim that what you have in the text is the exact wording that Allah gives to Muhammad? And if you make that claim, how would you go about proving it?
You mean in terms of when God spoke to the prophet?
Yeah. So for example, Surah 5, ayah 17, where Allah says that He is not the Christ. That in fact, if He wanted to destroy the Christ and Mary, who would stop Him? Did He say it in that exact way? Because you have an issue in the Quran where Allah recounts the same story and the same instance of that story multiple times. Take, for example, Moses at the burning bush. Pull up Surah Taha, Surah 20, 27, 28. The exact same story of him approaching the bush and hearing the words of Allah are recited. However, in each subsequent story, Allah uses different words in the same instance. So for example, when he approaches, what does he hear? Does he hear, "It is I, Allah," or it is me, Lord of the worlds"? Or does he hear both? So the same thing kind of happens. What exactly did he say? I believe what you have in that's an evidence that in the Quran, what you have is an approximation of what was said, not the actual wording, for example.
So it's given in Arabic.
Okay?
So already there's an approximation. So it's not quoting the verbatim speech that was said to Moses in the language that Moses would have understood. The Quran is narrating the story in the language of the audience.
Sure.
And so it's given in terms of the meaning of the story.
I will say something about Christ.
But yeah, I mean the Gospels are written in Greek. So they're written in a different language to the one that Jesus spoke.
Well,
And sometimes you can
That's
trace
an assumption.
yeah, it'll be an assumption. I mean, for example,
in terms of the conversations he had with the disciples would
Yep.
not have been in Greek. It would have been in their mother tongue, which would have been Aramaic.
well, why do you think they would only speak one language when they were colonized? For example,
Well, Paul says so because Paul in the book of Acts says when Jesus appeared,
it was in
to
Hebrew.
him, yeah, he spoke
Yeah,
to him in
but
Hebrew.
Paul doesn't say that the disciples only spoke one language, and
Well,
Paul
the
is.
disciples, well, that's how they were perceived as. They were
Well,
perceived as being uneducated fishermen.
Uneducated doesn't entail
Yeah,
that
well, I
you
think-
only speak one language,
think
because
you're missing the
there are many
education system
uneducated
within
people
Jewish
who speak multiple
Jewish
languages of necessity. For example,
But you know, back
Yep.
then they made a distinction between the verbal speech and written speech. So you could be like fluent like in speech, but doesn't mean you're also literate.
that happens today.
Nowadays you have that where people are both bilingual, but back then not everyone could write.
That still happens today. So for example, I'm from Nigeria.
Yeah.
There's a language that I should know how to speak. I speak it very loosely, but I can't write it or read the text. So the same thing happens today that happened back then. My take on
like in other cultures.
yeah. So my take on it
I
is
mean, in terms of the West, like people that are educated in the West, they end up being bilingual, like in English, basically.
yeah. So
Being
think
able
about
to
it.
read and speak English.
Think
at the
about it
same
this
time.
way.
Back then, it wasn't necessary.
Yeah. If you have some additional time, in the first century, Judea is a Roman province.
Yeah.
They are governed by Roman officials, and they have Roman centurions walking around, Roman merchants, Roman tradesmen. A lot of Roman culture is being imported into Judea. In the same way that today, the largest English-speaking country in the world isn't England, but Nigeria, due to just 44 years of colonization. Sorry, 46 years of colonization. It would stand to reason that since Nigerians will speak English as a common language, but then their own dialect even of their ethnic language, it would stand to reason that people who were tax collectors and fishermen who had to pay tax would have some understanding of both their native language as well as that of the sort of like regime that was controlling their their civilization. And also, lastly, you have an axe, the Holy Spirit comes down, and suddenly now they can either speak other language or unsound languages. So
speaking in
there's,
tongues. Yeah.
there's many avenues you can go around to sort of justifying the idea that
And they say
it's very
much
possible.
too early for the disciples to be drunk.
Exactly.
And I think the custom with the Jewish people was to train particularly the boys up until they were 12 in the Jewish scriptures and the traditions.
But I mean, in terms of the conversations that Jesus has prior to the day of Pentecost and prior to the church forming,
I believe it will be multilingual. Yes.
So it would have, from my understanding, it would have been in Aramaic.
Well, think about it.
So when
Jesus would have had a
calls Matthew, it would have been
Levi.
in Aramaic rather than.
Well, think about it this way. He could. So Jesus had a particular Galilean dialect of Aramaic, but then why do you then think that he would have been able to communicate with somebody else who wasn't from Galilee, who had a different Aramaic dialect efficiently?
I'm open to Jesus being bilingual. Like have more than one
I
language.
say he knew every language.
I don't think just he was bilingual. I think they all were.
Sure,
Yeah.
But in terms of the conversation
Yep.
that takes place, that's recorded in the Gospels,
Yep.
those conversations would have been in Aramaic and not like in
No.
Greek or.
I would say not necessarily. For example, when he reads the scriptures, he'll read it to them in Hebrew. They'll have to understand that in order
Those
to.
are sister languages, isn't it?
Right, but just because
it's like Urdu and Punjabi.
right, but that there's still two different languages. So the notion that he would have only spoken to them in one language, and for example, what about when he? So to take this for example, what about when he speaks to the centurion or the centurion's helpers who come to recruit Christ to come to their home and heal his servants? He speaks to those people in a language other than Aramaic because they're Greek. But then the disciples are able to interpret that instance and then also carve out what he says.
What's the reference for that?
That would be in Matthew. I don't know off the top of my head. I need to get it. Let me get it for you. Matthew 8. Blah, 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 blah. Yes, the faith of a centurion. This is Matthew 8:5.
When he entered Capernaum.
Yeah, when he entered. So, sure. What do you want? So, when he entered Capernaum, a centurion approached him and appealed to him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, suffering dreadfully. Now, if it's a centurion, what language is he using to speak to Jesus?
So it could either be Greek or it could be in the centurion could also be bilingual as well.
Do centurions
Okay,
do centurions need to be bilingual? He could be, but do they need to be bilingual because they're high-ranking officers?
I don't know. I mean, maybe they have an interpreter or a translator or something.
If they are the colonizer, it befits them to actually just speak their own language, and other people having to assent to their language.
So it's possible they could use some interpreter, and the interpreter's just not mentioned because it's not important.
I would say if there was an interpreter, sorry, what?
Do you want to hold it? For
No,
you?
I go.
Oh, okay.
If there was an interpreter, it would be mentioned because then it would seem like this entire conversation is being had through a mediator.
Okay.
But then when an
Bible
interpreter,
doesn't always mention interpreters like Jacob and Esau. Like when they have conversations, I mean, it mentions early on that there were messengers sent.
Exactly.
In, but then after
So
that,
it lays the
just
context.
says that, yeah.
in that particular story.
Yeah.
But here, it appears to be a direct conversation,
Okay.
right? So my take is two things. Number one, the centurion in the first century would have had no explicit indication to speak Aramaic. And particularly the kind of Aramaic that Jesus apparently understands, the Galilean dialects. And secondarily, it is being spoken in, I say, Greek.
Oh, okay.
And the disciples are somehow able, Matthew is somehow able to witness this happening and record it, even though it was spoken in a language other than the one he knew.
Okay,
So
that's
those are
interesting.
my
Yeah,
two
thanks
takes.
for sharing that.
Not a problem. But and also, what's initially interesting is, if you don't mind, just like a side note. So basically, the story is that he comes. Actually, let me read the whole thing. It's a pretty cool story. So when he entered Capernaum, a centurion approached him and appealed to him, saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home paralyzed, suffering dreadfully. He said to him, I will come and cure him. The centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you enter under my roof. Only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a person subject to authority, with soldiers subject to me. And I say to one, go, and he goes. And I say to another, come here, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, Amen. I say to you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith. I say to you, many will come from the east and the west, and will recline with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the banquet in the kingdom of heaven. But the children of the kingdom will be driven into the outer darkness, where there will be wailing and grinding of teeth. So when and later on he meets the Syrophoenician woman, right? So when the argument is made that he only came for X group, it appears that all the way back here in Matthew 8, he's already declaring that there will be people who are not Jewish who will come and recline at the seat of Abraham because of their faith. So that's why when they make the argument that he only came for the lost tribe and nobody else, that isn't true. It's simply sequentially. He comes to the Jew first and then sends his disciples out to the Gentiles.
Okay.
But even when coming for the Jews first, he still interacts with people who aren't Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then with Pontius Pilate as well, there's no sign of an interpreter in those dialogues either.
Yeah. That one I'm not too sure about because it mentions, with regards to the Jews, they refused to enter Pilate's court because of this Passover meal. In terms of Jesus, he was inside Pilate's court.
Mhm.
So, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I mean,
Yeah.
either Jesus spoke to him directly or
Yeah.
there could be an interpreter.
Yeah. But I just see it as English these days is if I went to Nigeria, I could probably speak to people.
Yeah.
And there's many countries where I can go to and still get away with just speaking English. My son is going to Korea, and over there they speak English, but he has purposely learnt Korean so he can speak to them in their native language. But he didn't have to do that, and Greek was all over the world at that time. You know, the Romans were everywhere. They weren't just in Jerusalem.
And then Paul too, when he first goes, when he first like gets sort of like converted into Christianity, he goes into Arabia. What's a Jew doing in Arabia? Who's he going to communicate with?
It's a good question.
Yeah, they would have been speaking like Greek down there, an early form of Arabic, Syriac. Yeah, so clearly being multilingual at the time was necessary. I think even more so, it's just like an assertion. I can't like prove this for certain, but I would say that in the lack of a universal language like we have English today, it was more common for people who would travel to be able to speak multiple languages as opposed to one, because it doesn't help them.
What
Yeah.
about the conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus?
Yep.
Where it says you must be born again.
Yep.
When Nicodemus understood Jesus to be speaking physically,
Yep.
but Jesus meant to be born again like a second spiritual.
Yeah.
Spiritual.
I've
But
seen
the
one
Greek
note.
word there
Yeah.
is anothen.
Yes.
And anothen has that double meaning
Yep.
in Greek. But in Hebrew, there's so Aramaic, there's
Yep.
no equivalent word
Right.
that has that double meaning.
Right.
There's a different word for being born, and there's another word
Yeah.
for that kind of spiritual
So some
generation.
because of that, you know where this is going. Some postulate. Oh, interesting. Because of that, some postulate that the conversation was in Greek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's why there was the confusion.
What exactly do you mean by that? Which one are you using here? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, some say because it was Nicodemus.
Yep.
Nicodemus being a Jew and
Yep.
Jesus also being a Jew.
Yep.
Would have made more sense to have the conversation in Aramaic.
It depends
that's
actually.
their mother tongue.
Nicodemus isn't from Galilee, so he'll speak a different dialect. So maybe let's use a universal language where we're not gonna trade words to each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. That's
Yeah.
the possibility,
So
You gonna
it could've
apply
been a
or
different
you
dialect.
still good?
yeah. Am I what? Sorry?
You gonna go or you say you have to go shortly? Are you still good or?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fine. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Did you want to speak about something else, like more questions, or do you want to conclude?
Give me.
Well,
have you heard
Shall I
about?
come back then?
No, I was gonna ask you a question actually. But
okay.
I wanted to know if you had to leave because like I didn't want to be keeping you here when you had to go. You mentioned you had to go shortly. I didn't want to be keeping you here, so I'm just checking like
No,
routinely.
I just want to see who else is here.
Sure.
But
Okay, well, last one.
Okay.
What's your thoughts on the continuity argument with Muhammad?